When the bomb countdown reached exactly 15 seconds, the husband I trusted locked the steel door, abandoning me with the secondary explosive to let his young mistress play the hero. He had no idea that the moment he walked away, I transformed his death trap into a live broadcast. Their ruthless lies, cruel betrayal, and her hollow intuition were about to be stripped bare before millions of watching eyes. Hello, wonderful listeners of the Violet Revenge Stories channel. Our channel has unfortunately been demonetized by YouTube, leaving us without a budget to operate. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the PayPal link in the description or the comments section of this video. My name is Brianna Cook. At 32 years old, I held the position of Strategic Security Director at Apex Sentinel Systems, a premier private defense contractor based in Chicago. To the public eye, my husband, Declan Hayes, was the golden boy of the company, the charismatic face of our most complex tactical triumphs, behind closed doors. I was the architect of his legacy. I designed the protocols, mapped the threat analyses, and fed him the exact strategies that made him look like a visionary. I never minded the shadows. I thought we were a team, a single unit moving toward a shared future, building an empire from the ground up. I was content being the silent engine driving his success, believing that his victories were our victories. But gratitude is a fragile thing, easily shattered by the allure of a new audience. That new audience arrived in the form of Chloe Jenkins. She was Declan's latest apprentice, a fresh-faced intern whose arrogance far outweighed her actual field experience. Chloe possessed a dangerous breed of confidence, one born of sheer ignorance rather than hard-earned competence. In our line of work, a mistake does not mean a bad quarterly review. It means a crater in the ground and body bags. Yet, she constantly boasted about her supposed innate intuition when it came to handling explosive devices. While the rest of us adhered to rigorous, life-saving safety standards, memorizing circuit paths and chemical blast radiuses, she dismissed them as bureaucratic red tape. She claimed she could feel the current of a circuit before she ever saw it. Declan, completely intoxicated by her blind worship of him and her eager willingness to stroke his ego, encouraged this reckless behavior. He started bypassing standard training modules for her, treating her dangerous delusions as signs of unpolished genius. The turning point, the moment the veil began to lift from my eyes, happened during our annual company gala. It was a lavish affair, crawling with high-ranking government officials, military contractors, and ultra-wealthy investors. The champagne flowed endlessly, and egos expanded to fill the grand ballroom. I stood quietly near the perimeter, observing the room with the trained eye of a security professional, when I heard Chloe's voice piercing through the ambient chatter. She was surrounded by a group of captivated, wealthy executives who knew nothing about actual combat. "I do not even need the schematics," she declared loudly, swirling her expensive drink, making sure her voice carried across the room. "I could defuse a standard timer blindfolded. It is all about the vibe of the mechanism, the rhythm of the detonator. You just have to trust your gut and let your instincts guide your hands." I watched Declan standing right beside her, a proud, sickening smirk plastered across his face. He did not correct her. He did not remind her that a bomb does not care about vibes, that high explosives do not respect intuition. He just let her parade this lethal fantasy, basking in the reflected glow of her youthful audacity. I maintained my composed exterior, offering polite smiles to passing colleagues, but my mind was already cataloging the subtle, sinister shifts in my reality. I started noticing the lingering glances between Declan and Chloe, the way their shoulders brushed just a second too long when they thought no one was looking, the hushed conversations that abruptly ended the moment I entered a room. Then came the financial anomalies. I have always managed our wealth, so hiding money from me was a fool's errand. While meticulously reviewing our joint accounts, I found several massive, unexplained withdrawals, They were carefully staggered through dummy vendor invoices, but the money trail led directly to lease payments for high-end luxury penthouses downtown. Declan had claimed he was investing in a new covert ops training facility, but tactical gear does not come with panoramic views of the skyline, imported marble countertops, and private rooftop pools. Confrontation is the weapon of the amateur. A loud, tearful argument, throwing bank statements in his face, would only give him the opportunity to lie, to manipulate me, and to cover his tracks more efficiently. I am a security strategist. I deal in hard data, surveillance, and absolute certainty. Late one night, when Declan was deeply asleep after a supposed late shift, I bypassed the biometric locks on his personal devices. I embedded a military-grade encrypted surveillance program directly into his root system, linking his phone and laptop to a secure server only I controlled. It took less than 10 minutes. What I uncovered over the next 72 hours was a betrayal so profound it chilled the blood in my veins and killed whatever love I had left for the man sleeping next to me. They were not just sleeping together in those luxury apartments. They were actively orchestrating my execution. Audio recordings from his car and encrypted text threads revealed a meticulous, monstrous plot. Declan and Chloe were planning to manufacture a high-stakes security crisis during our next major deployment. Their objective was simple and utterly ruthless. Declan would manipulate the field logistics to push me into a fatal technical error. The resulting explosion would kill me instantly, and he would ensure the official incident report blamed my incompetence. In the aftermath, Declan would inherit our entire multi-million-dollar estate as the grieving widower, free from any suspicion. Meanwhile, Chloe would miraculously step in to resolve the remaining threat, stepping into my role. Hailed by the media and the company as the brilliant prodigy who tried her best to save the day. They thought they had accounted for every variable. They laughed about it, calling me an outdated relic holding them back. But they forgot one crucial detail. I was the one who taught Declan everything he knew about setting a trap. Exactly 1 week passed before their meticulously crafted opportunity presented itself. The Obsidian Tower was a gleaming spike of glass and steel piercing the heart of the Chicago skyline. That morning it was hosting the Global Financial Summit. Dozens of international dignitaries and corporate titans were gathered in the Grand Hall. Security was supposed to be impenetrable, but shortly after 10 o'clock in the morning, a frantic call came through the encrypted emergency channels. A maintenance crew had discovered a massive explosive device. It was highly complex and anchored directly into the primary load-bearing columns in the main structural basement. This was not a training drill. It was a potential mass casualty event. It was a genuine crisis that demanded immediate and expert intervention. Our tactical assault vehicles roared through the blocked city streets, with sirens screaming. As soon as we breached the loading dock command center, Declan immediately asserted his authority as the field commander. The atmosphere was incredibly tense. The air was filled with shouting law enforcement officers and terrified building staff. I stepped forward and began pulling on my tactical gloves. I was mentally preparing to run the initial diagnostic on the explosive, but Declan physically blocked my path. He raised a hand with his face set in a mask of grim determination. I knew now that his expression was entirely theatrical. "Stand down, Brianna," he commanded. His voice was loud enough for the surrounding police commanders and the local media liaisons to hear. "I need you running the perimeter logistics up here. Chloe is going to take point on the primary diffusal. She has the touch for this kind of modern circuitry." I looked at him and let a flicker of feigned surprise cross my face before stepping back in silent obedience. Chloe strutted past me. She was already wearing the heavy protective suit, but she left the helmet visor up so everyone could see her confident and arrogant smile. She looked like an actress stepping onto a movie set. She was completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality of the device waiting in the dark. She descended into the primary basement accompanied by a heavy tactical escort. She was carrying her diagnostic tools like mere props for a photo opportunity. Through the live feed patched into our mobile command center monitors, I watched her approach the device. It was a beast of a bomb. It was wired with redundant safety overrides, chemical triggers, and a digital display that ominously read 2 hours and 15 minutes. A standard defusal required methodical isolation of the power source. You had to trace every single wire with an electromagnetic sensor before ever touching a cutting blade. But Chloe did not do that. She stared at the tangled mess of colored wires and circuit boards. She hovered her gloved hands over the payload as if trying to sense its aura. "I got this," Chloe announced confidently over the radio link. "The primary detonator is linked to the blue sequence. It feels obvious. I am bypassing the diagnostic run. Before anyone could shout a warning, before the tactical officers beside her could even flinch, she drove her snips right into the thickest bundle of wires and clamped down hard. A piercing and high-pitched alarm instantly echoed from the device. She had not found the power source. She had hit the anti-tamper mercury switch. The digital display on the bomb flashed violently. It changed from green to a stark and angry red. The countdown timer blurred and skipped entire hours and minutes in a fraction of a second. When it stopped flashing, the new time locked in place. We had less than 30 minutes until total structural annihilation. Complete chaos erupted over the radio. Chloe screamed and dropped her tools. She stumbled backward. All her previous bravado evaporated into pure and unadulterated terror. The tactical team with her began shouting for immediate evacuation orders. Up in the command center, the blood drained from the face of Declan. His perfect stage play had just turned into a genuine death sentence. The realization that his brilliant prodigy had just doomed everyone in a 10-block radius hit him incredibly hard. But Declan was nothing if not a ruthless opportunist. As panic consumed the command post, I saw his eyes dart around frantically before settling on the blueprints of the building. His survival instinct kicked in and merged seamlessly with his murderous agenda. If they were going to fail, he needed his scapegoat immediately. Declan grabbed his private radio channel, which was linked directly to my earpiece. "Brianna," he barked while infusing his voice with a manufactured urgency, "the trigger just fried the main power grid of the building. The blast doors are going to lock us all in if the system resets. I need you to get down to the isolated technical room on sub-basement level 4 right now. Manually override the breaker panels or we are all dead. Go." It was a direct order in the middle of a catastrophic crisis. To hesitate would be insubordination. To refuse would look like cowardice. I gave him a curt nod and sprinted toward the emergency stairwell. My boots echoed loudly against the concrete steps. I descended deeper into the earth and passed level after level. The air grew colder and staler the further down I went. Sub-basement level 4 was a forgotten labyrinth of utility pipes and concrete pillars. It was far removed from the main action above. I located the heavy steel door of the technical room exactly where the blueprints indicated. I threw my weight against the handle and pushed the massive door open. I stepped into the dimly lit space. The moment my boots cleared the threshold, the heavy door slammed shut behind me with a deafening metallic crash. The distinct and electronic chirp of a high-level security deadbolt engaging echoed in the small room. I spun around and grabbed the handle. It was locked solid. I turned my attention back to the room itself. There were no breaker panels. There was no power grid override. Resting on a metal table in the center of the room and blinking with a steady green light was a secondary explosive device. It was small and compact, but packed with enough military-grade explosives to turn this reinforced room into an oven of fire and shrapnel. The timer on this device was perfectly synced with the monstrous bomb upstairs. It showed exactly 24 minutes remaining. My earpiece crackled to life. The voice of Declan came through, but the frantic panic from earlier was entirely gone. His tone was cold and detached. It was utterly devoid of humanity. "I am sorry, Brianna," he said softly with a sick layer of fake mourning in his words. "Chloe made a mistake, a fatal one. We cannot stop the primary detonation, but the narrative needs a villain, and it cannot be the face of the franchise. Your presence down there tampering with the secondary system provides the perfect cover. The official report will state that your personal technical error triggered the chain reaction. You panicked, and you made a mistake, and it cost you your life. Do not worry. I will make sure the world remembers you as the technician who died trying to fix her own mess. Goodbye." The radio clicked off and left me in absolute silence. The only sound remaining was the steady and terrifying ticking of the bomb in front of me. Most people assume that facing imminent death triggers a chaotic emotional breakdown. They expect frantic screaming, desperate pleading, or a flood of useless tears. I offered none of those things to the cold concrete walls surrounding me. The silence left in the wake of that radio transmission was absolute and heavy, punctuated only by the steady and rhythmic chirp of the digital timer on the table, dropping to exactly 23 minutes and 45 seconds. There was no despair in my chest. The monumental weight of his betrayal did not crush my spirit. Instead, it acted as a violent catalyst. It burned away every lingering trace of shock and hardened my resolve into a terrifying and crystalline clarity. The man I had meticulously built from the ground up had just tried to bury me in the foundation of his own massive ego. He wanted me to die alone in the dark as his convenient scapegoat. I decided in that exact fraction of a second that he was going to die a very public and humiliating failure. I did not waste a single moment staring helplessly at the explosive device resting on the metal table. My eyes systematically scanned the perimeter of the cramped technical room. The space was sparse, but it was not completely empty. In the far corner sat a heavy spool of industrial-grade and shielded network cabling left behind by the original construction crews. I moved toward it with purposeful strides, while simultaneously unstrapping the military-grade tactical tablet secured tightly to my chest rig. This expensive device was designed to withstand extreme combat environments, but I was about to destroy it completely. I placed the tablet flat on the concrete floor and drew the sharp ceramic utility blade from my tactical belt. With precise and forceful movements, I pried the reinforced casing apart to expose the intricate internal architecture and the dense and high-capacity lithium polymer battery core. An explosive device like the one sitting quietly on the table relied entirely on a closed-loop digital circuit to trigger the primary blasting cap. If I could overwhelm that delicate circuit with a sudden and massive surge of electromagnetic energy, I could permanently fuse the logic board and render the detonator completely inert. I needed to build a localized electromagnetic pulse. I grabbed the spool of network cable and used my sharp blade to strip away the thick rubber insulation to pull out several yards of pure copper wire. I began coiling the bare copper tightly around the exposed battery core of the tablet to create a dense and makeshift induction coil. Every single wrap had to be perfectly tensioned to maximize the magnetic field generation. My hands moved with absolute mechanical efficiency, while relying on the deep muscle memory I had ingrained through countless years of theoretical study and practical field engineering. When I had constructed an adequate coil, I carefully severed the main power regulation microchip on the motherboard of the tablet to intentionally bypass all the built-in safety protocols. I wired the frayed ends of the copper coil directly to the positive and negative terminals of the volatile battery. The final step required intentionally short-circuiting the entire system to force a catastrophic discharge of all the stored electrical energy in a fraction of a millisecond. I carefully positioned my improvised device directly next to the bomb on the metal table and then pushed it slightly so it also leaned against the electronic locking mechanism of the heavy steel door. I took a slow and deep breath and braced my body securely behind the reinforced concrete pillar in the center of the room. I reached my arm around to press the exposed copper wires firmly against the raw battery contacts. The chemical and electrical reaction was instantaneous and violently aggressive. A brilliant and blinding arc of pure blue electricity snapped fiercely across the copper coil and was followed immediately by a sharp and deafening crack that echoed painfully off the concrete walls. The strong smell of ozone and melting plastic instantly filled the stagnant air. The lithium battery casing ruptured with a loud pop and hissed aggressively as it vented dark, toxic smoke into the room. I stepped out from behind the concrete pillar and looked directly at the table. The digital display of the secondary bomb was completely dark. The steady green light was permanently extinguished. The internal logic board had been thoroughly fried and destroyed by the directed energy pulse. I turned my attention away from the table and toward the heavy steel door. The large electromagnetic lock, which required a continuous and stable power feed to remain engaged, had also been caught within the blast radius of the pulse. I gripped the cold metal handle and pulled heavily downward. The massive door swung open with a smooth and heavy glide. I stepped out of the confined space and back into the dim hallway of sub-basement level 4. The immediate threat to my life was neutralized, but rushing back upstairs to confront them physically would be a severe tactical error. If I appeared on the main floor right now, he would simply claim I had miraculously survived my own stupid blunder and quickly spin the narrative back into his favor before I could expose the bitter truth. I needed immense leverage. I needed absolute and undeniable proof. And most importantly, I needed a massive audience. Instead of heading for the emergency stairwell, I moved deeper into the subterranean levels of the massive building. I navigated the complex maze of utility corridors until I finally reached the primary data node for the entire structure. I had found the main server room. The entrance was protected by a high-end biometric scanner and a numerical keypad, but the physical security protocols of a corporate office building are fundamentally flawed when compared to strict military standards. I easily bypassed the terminal by accessing the maintenance junction box embedded in the drywall beside it and used my utility blade to bridge the internal relay pins to force the magnetic locking mechanism to quickly disengage. I slipped silently inside the server room. It was a massive and cavernous space filled with dozens of rows of towering black server racks that hummed loudly with the sound of thousands of cooling fans and blinked wildly with millions of tiny colored lights. This room was the central nervous system of the entire financial tower. I located the primary administrative terminal sitting on a desk at the far end of the room. My tactical tablet was utterly destroyed, but I did not need it anymore. I now had the entire digital network infrastructure of the building directly at my fingertips. My fingers flew rapidly across the mechanical keyboard to break through their rudimentary corporate firewalls with aggressive and brute-force digital algorithms. Within 3 short minutes, I had successfully secured root access to the central building management system. I immediately locked out all other administrative accounts across the network and changed the primary encryption keys to a highly complex string of characters that only I knew. I now possessed total and uncontested control over the security cameras and the public address system and the internal communication networks and the digital display boards. I opened a series of secure command windows on the large monitor to isolate the closed-circuit video feeds originating from the primary basement where they were currently staging their pathetic and deadly disaster. The high-definition camera positioned directly above the main explosive device gave me a perfect and unobstructed overhead view of them both. She was physically shaking uncontrollably and her hands were hovering uselessly over the intricate wiring while he paced back and forth frantically. Heavy sweat was glistening on his forehead as he desperately tried to figure out a way to save his own skin. They looked incredibly small and incredibly desperate in the face of a real crisis. Next, I accessed the audiovisual routing matrix for the massive main lobby upstairs. Hundreds of government officials and wealthy investors and high-ranking police commanders were currently gathered there and held behind the yellow evacuation perimeter while waiting anxiously for any news. The luxurious lobby was equipped with massive and towering digital screens, typically used for displaying corporate advertisements and summit schedules. With a few rapid keystrokes, I completely overrode their standard programming. I established a secure and anonymous and untraceable live stream protocol. I took the direct video and audio feed from the bomb site down in the basement and pushed it live to every single massive screen in the building. I also synchronized the audio feed with the tactical radio frequencies used by the police and the special weapons and tactics teams currently on site. From the cool and humming darkness of the isolated server room, I had expertly woven an inescapable digital web. I was the invisible ghost in the machine and the architect of their impending ruin. I was entirely ready to broadcast their extreme incompetence and their cruel malice to the exact audience they so desperately wanted to impress. On the glowing monitors inside the server room, the high-definition feed displayed a masterpiece of absolute panic. Down in the primary basement, the reality of the situation had finally crushed whatever delusions of grandeur Chloe Jenkins had brought with her. The massive explosive device was shielded by a thick and seamless titanium casing, a defensive measure that required a high-frequency thermal cutter to bypass safely. Chloe did not have one. Instead, she was on her knees, physically trembling so violently that the heavy diagnostic tools in her hands clattered noisily against the concrete floor. She was crying. Heavy and pitiful sobs echoed loudly through the sensitive microphones attached to her tactical gear. Her mascara was running down her face in thick black streaks, ruining her perfect camera-ready appearance. Behind her, the great tactical genius was entirely abandoning his post. Declan was sweating profusely, his eyes darting wildly around the dim basement as he backed away from the kill zone. He was no longer looking at the explosive or offering guidance to his apprentice. He was looking for an emergency exit. He was trying to figure out how to leave her behind and save his own life before the timer reached 0. The cowardice was so palpable, it was almost a physical presence in the room. Upstairs in the grand lobby, hundreds of dignitaries and heavily armed tactical officers were watching this exact feed on the massive digital displays. I had unmuted the basement audio, piping Chloe weeping directly into the breathless silence of the upper floors. It was time to make my entrance. I leaned forward and pressed the activation key for the global public address system. My voice, cold and heavily amplified, boomed from every single speaker simultaneously, echoing through the basement corridors and thundering across the grand lobby. "Is something wrong with the vibe of the mechanism, Chloe?" I asked, allowing my tone to drip with pure and venomous sarcasm. "Or is your blindfolded intuition having trouble penetrating 3 inches of reinforced titanium?" "Down in the basement!" Chloe gasped and whipped her head around, searching the empty shadows. Declan froze in his tracks, his face drained of all remaining color, turning a sickly shade of ash. In the lobby, the crowd erupted into a chaotic murmur of shock. The dead woman was speaking. "Brianna," Declan stammered into his headset, his voice shaking violently. "How are you on this frequency? You are supposed to be trapped." "I am exactly where I need to be," I replied smoothly, ignoring his pathetic confusion. I focused my attention entirely on the crying girl. "Let us talk about your innate genius. Chloe, you just bypassed a standard continuity check and drove a conductive steel snip directly into a bundle of decoy wires. You triggered a mercury anti-tamper switch because you failed to ground your own boots. You do not even know what the chemical composition of the primary charge is, do you?" "I do not know," she sobbed hysterically, dropping her tools completely and covering her face with her gloved hands. "I do not know what I am doing. Declan told me it would be easy. He told me the schematics were just suggestions." "Admit it," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip through the speakers. "Say it loudly so every single government official and field agent in this building can hear you. You have no idea how to disarm that device. You are a fraud playing a lethal game of dress-up." "I have no idea what to do," Chloe wailed, collapsing entirely onto the floor beside the ticking bomb. "I am just an intern. I lied. We lied." Her confession echoed through the entire financial tower. The humiliation was absolute, broadcast live in high definition to the exact people they had tried to manipulate. Declan finally snapped out of his paralyzed state. Furious and desperate, he grabbed his tactical radio. "Command, cut the main audio feed immediately. She has gone rogue. Shut down the network." He began running toward the wall panels, frantically ripping out audio cables in a useless attempt to silence my voice. "You cannot shut me out, Declan," I mocked him, watching his pathetic struggle on the monitors. "Every digital system, every camera, and every speaker in this building is currently locked behind a 256-bit military-grade encryption key, my personal key. You are trapped on my stage now." He stood there panting, looking up at the security camera with a mixture of pure hatred and dawning terror. He knew he had lost control of the narrative, but he still thought he could salvage his career by playing the victim of a jealous wife. He had no idea how deep I had dug his grave. "Since we are broadcasting confessions to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the local SWAT commanders," I continued, my voice steady and deadly calm, "I think it is only fair that the audience understands exactly why the renowned Declan Hayes allowed an unqualified amateur to touch a live weapon of mass destruction, and why he sent his own wife into a rigged room on sub-basement level 4. I opened the secure audio file I had extracted from his encrypted phone the previous week. With a single keystroke, I broadcasted the high-quality recording across the entire building. The smooth, arrogant voice of Declan filled the airwaves. "Brianna is completely obsolete," the recorded Declan laughed. "We just need to push her into the red zone during the Obsidian deployment. I will route her to a secondary system, lock the door, and let the blast take the blame. It will look like a tragic technical failure. I get the life insurance and the entire company portfolio, and you get the hero edit on the evening news." Then came the recorded voice of Chloe, giggling maliciously. "Are you sure she will not figure it out? She is supposed to be the strategic genius. She is blinded by loyalty," the recorded Declan replied with sneering confidence. "She will walk right into it if I give the order." I cut the audio file. The silence that followed was heavier than concrete. On my monitors, I watched the immediate and catastrophic fallout. In the main lobby, the stunned silence of the tactical teams shattered. The Federal Bureau of Investigation lead agent began barking furious orders into his radio. Down in the basement, the tactical escort officers who had accompanied Chloe and Declan slowly raised their weapons. The click of their safety catches disengaging was loud enough to be picked up by the room microphones. Declan slowly raised his hands, his eyes wide with absolute horror. The officers were no longer looking at him as their brilliant field commander. They were staring at him with undisguised disgust and pure aggressive hostility. 5 assault rifles were now aimed directly at his chest. His heroic facade had not just crumbled, it had been entirely vaporized. He was completely exposed as a cowardly, murderous traitor on live television, and there was nowhere left for him to run. The digital timer on my primary monitor indicated there were exactly 3 minutes remaining before the explosive device leveled the entire financial tower. It was the perfect moment to make my physical entrance. I left the quiet solitude of the server room and began my walk toward the primary basement. I did not run. I moved with a slow, deliberate, and entirely dominant stride. The heavy combat boots I wore echoed sharply against the concrete floor, a rhythmic and terrifying sound that preceded my arrival. When I reached the heavy blast doors of the main containment zone, the heavily armed tactical officers from the local police force immediately stepped aside. They lowered their automatic weapons and parted like the Red Sea, watching me with a mixture of absolute awe and profound shock. I was no longer just the wife of their commander. I was the apex predator who had just orchestrated the most spectacular exposure of treason they had ever witnessed. I stepped into the harsh, blinding glare of the temporary work lights, set up around the kill zone. The air down there was thick, hot, and smelled strongly of ozone and sheer human terror. Chloe was still on her knees right in front of the massive bomb. She was completely useless, sobbing loudly and shivering as if she were trapped in a freezing blizzard. I walked straight toward her. I did not offer her a comforting word. I did not even look her in the eye. I simply reached out, grabbed the thick shoulder strap of her expensive tactical vest, and shoved her violently backward. She tumbled across the rough floor, crying out in pain as she scraped her elbows, and finally scrambled out of my way like a terrified rat fleeing a sinking ship. I knelt directly in front of the exposed explosive core. Through the lens of the high-definition surveillance cameras, I knew the top explosive ordnance disposal experts from the Federal Bureau of Investigation were holding their breath, watching my hands. They were about to witness a masterclass in tactical engineering. Unlike the arrogant and clumsy girl sobbing in the corner, my hands moved with the flawless precision of a programmed machine. This was not about intuition. This was about thousands of hours of relentless study and practical application. I drew my thermal plasma cutter and ignited the bright blue flame. In less than 15 seconds, I cleanly sliced through the 4 heavy titanium locking pins that Chloe had been entirely unable to bypass. The heavy protective shell fell away and hit the floor with a loud metallic clang. The internal architecture of the bomb was a nightmare of cascading trap circuits. If you dropped the voltage by even 1%, the primary detonator would fire. If you attempted to freeze the timer with liquid nitrogen, a secondary thermal sensor would trigger the blast. My eyes scanned the complex web of red, blue, and yellow wires, instantly identifying the critical pathways. I drew my ceramic blade and a specialized conductive shunt. In one smooth and continuous motion, I bridged the primary anti-tamper relay to keep the logic board perfectly stable, while I simultaneously severed the main power feed to the chemical blasting cap. It took me exactly 45 seconds to completely isolate the payload. The weapon was entirely dead. The immediate threat to the city was neutralized. However, I had not come down here just to save the building. I came down here to absolutely break the man who had tried to murder me. While my body blocked the direct line of sight from the overhead camera, my right hand moved swiftly. The actual countdown had been terminated, but I secretly connected a small digital bypass drive directly into the display panel of the bomb. I uploaded a malicious simulation script. Suddenly, the digital screen, which had gone dark, flared back to life. It began flashing a violently bright and angry red color. The siren inside the bomb casing shrieked loudly. The simulated timer showed exactly 40 seconds remaining, and the numbers began dropping erratically, skipping seconds in a terrifying display of an imminent and uncontrollable catastrophic failure. To anyone watching, including the experts upstairs, it looked exactly like the bomb was going to explode in a matter of seconds. That was the exact moment Declan completely shattered. The sight of the flashing red lights and the sound of the screaming siren broke his mind. He collapsed heavily onto his knees. The great and fearless tactical commander, the man who had confidently sentenced me to die just 30 minutes prior, began wailing with a pathetic, high-pitched intensity. "No!" Declan screamed loudly, his voice tearing and breaking in his throat. He crawled frantically across the concrete floor on his hands and knees, ignoring the tactical officers aiming rifles at his head. He crawled right to my boots. "Brianna, please. You have to fix it. You have to save me. I do not want to die. I will give you everything. I will give you all the money, the houses, the company shares. Just stop the timer." I stood up slowly and looked down at him with eyes as cold as dead winter. "It is a cascading system failure, Declan," I said smoothly, "just like the one you planned for me down on sub-basement level 4. "It was not my idea," he shrieked hysterically, thick tears and mucus pouring freely down his face. He pointed a violently shaking finger directly at Chloe, who was huddled against the far wall watching him in absolute horror. "It was all her idea. Chloe wanted your job and your life. She seduced me. She manipulated my feelings. She is a psychotic little tramp. I never wanted to hurt you. I was just using her because she was easy to control. She means absolutely nothing to me. Please, you have to believe me. Do not let me burn to death for her stupid mistakes." Chloe let out a loud, strangled gasp of pure devastation. In her final moments of perceived life, she realized that the man she worshipped and committed treason for viewed her as nothing more than disposable garbage. The betrayal hit her so hard she could not even speak. I let his incredibly pathetic words echo through the basement for a few long seconds. I wanted the microphones to record every single syllable of his ultimate cowardice. I wanted the entire world to hear the renowned hero completely sell out his mistress to save his own skin. Once I was entirely satisfied that his spirit and his reputation were permanently destroyed, I let a cold and razor-sharp smirk touch my lips. I slowly reached down and casually tapped the side of the digital display panel with 2 fingers. The loud and blaring siren instantly died. The aggressive red flashing lights vanished completely. The screen shifted to a solid, calm, and bright green color, displaying the word "safe" in large text. Declan stopped his frantic crying instantly. He stared blankly at the green screen, his mouth hanging open as his brain struggled to process what had just happened. He slowly looked up at my face. "There was no cascading failure," I told him quietly, my voice ringing with absolute and final authority. "The bomb was successfully disarmed over 2 minutes ago. I just needed to see exactly how fast you would throw your precious prodigy to the wolves to save your own miserable life. Everything you just said was broadcast live to the federal agents upstairs. It was a perfect psychological test, and you failed miserably." The heavy silence that followed my revelation in the basement was shattered by the thunderous sound of heavy combat boots hitting the concrete stairs. Dozens of federal agents swarmed the kill zone, There was no hesitation and no respect left for the man they once called a commander. 3 massive agents tackled Declan violently to the floor, driving his face hard against the rough concrete. They wrenched his arms behind his back, and the sharp, metallic click of heavy handcuffs echoed through the room. Chloe did not even try to resist. She remained curled in a pathetic ball against the wall until 2 officers grabbed her by the shoulder straps of her tactical vest and dragged her to her feet. The lead investigator read them their rights while loudly listing the federal charges. They were being arrested for domestic terrorism, conspiracy to commit premeditated murder, and the severe sabotage of national security. Watching them being shoved roughly into the back of heavily armored federal transport vehicles was the most profoundly satisfying moment of my entire life. Later that evening, inside the sterile, windowless interrogation rooms of the federal building, the remaining illusions they held completely evaporated. Chloe broke down within the first 10 minutes, desperate to shave even a single year off her impending sentence. She confessed to absolutely everything. She detailed every manipulative text message, every secret hotel meeting, and every step of the plot they had crafted to kill me. She tried her best to paint herself as the innocent victim of a powerful man, but her recorded giggles from my surveillance files destroyed any chance of sympathy. When the guards accidentally allowed their paths to cross in the secure holding hallway, the true nature of their relationship showed its ugly face. They tore into each other like rabid, cornered animals. They screamed vile curses, spitting venom and blaming one another for their absolute ruin. While they rotted in federal custody, my legal team moved with lethal and unforgiving speed. Armed with the high-definition recordings of his treason and undeniable proof of his infidelity, my lawyer filed an expedited petition for divorce. Within 48 hours, I secured a sweeping court order that legally froze every single joint bank account, every hidden investment portfolio, and the deed to our massive estate. Declan lost absolutely everything in the blink of an eye. The man who had prided himself on his immense wealth and public status was suddenly left entirely penniless. He could not even afford to hire a high-powered defense attorney and was forced to rely on an overworked public defender who despised him just as much as the rest of the country did. The criminal trial was a highly publicized media circus. The American public was thoroughly disgusted by his cowardice and his betrayal. Every major news network replayed the footage of him crawling on his knees, begging for his life while throwing his young mistress to the wolves. The jury took less than 2 hours to reach a unanimous verdict. The judge looked at them with utter contempt before delivering the crushing sentences. Declan Hayes received a sentence of life in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole. He would die in a concrete box, completely forgotten by the world he tried to conquer. Chloe Jenkins was sentenced to 25 years behind bars and received a lifetime ban from ever stepping foot inside the security or government contracting sector again. The loud bang of the wooden gavel hitting the sound block was the sweetest music I had ever heard. In the immediate aftermath, the board of directors at Apex Sentinel Systems moved swiftly to cleanse the company of his toxic legacy. They fired every single executive and manager who had enabled his reckless behavior, realizing who the true architect of their past successes had actually been. The board unanimously appointed me as the new chief executive officer of the entire national operation. I took his corner office, redesigned it entirely, and led the company into its most profitable quarter in history. Several months later, I found myself standing once again on the top floor of the Obsidian Tower. The building was whole and safe, a towering monument to my absolute victory. I held a glass of incredibly expensive vintage red wine in my hand, taking a slow sip as I looked out through the floor-to-ceiling glass windows. The sprawling, glittering skyline of Chicago stretched out beneath me, glowing brilliantly against the dark night sky. I was no longer the silent shadow behind a fraudulent man. I had total freedom, absolute power, and a brilliant future. I had permanently erased the fools who dared to use my life as a stepping stone, and I had never felt more alive. Thank you so much, wonderful listeners, for tuning into my story today. Where are you listening from right now? If you found today's story engaging and worthwhile, please consider supporting our channel with just $1. You can scan the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or use the PayPal link provided in the description and the comments section below. Your generous contribution allows us to pay our dedicated staff, helping them feed their families and continue creating these amazing stories for you. Thank you for your kindness and support.